I was the first to arrive at the coffee shop every morning. It had been my routine for years. Unlocking the doors at dawn, prepping the machines, and receiving early morning deliveries before the rush began. Our family had been running this place for nearly a decade. And in that time, we had built a strong reputation. Regulars knew us by name, and even those just passing through would often return after experiencing the warmth of our little cafe. Owning a coffee shop wasn't as glamorous as some people thought. The early mornings, the stress of running a business, the occasional difficult customer. It was all part of the job. But I loved it. There was something peaceful about those quiet hours before the world woke up. The hum of the espresso machine, the smell of freshly ground beans, the soft glow of the hanging lights. It felt like home. That morning started like any other. It was just before 5 a.m., still dark outside, and the streets were empty except for the occasional jogger or delivery truck passing by. I flipped on the lights, locked the door behind me, and walked to the back to start my routine. As I set up for the day, I thought about how much this place meant to me. The memories of long shifts, laughter with regulars, and even the odd late-night deep clean all played in my mind like a film reel. I had no idea that within the next hour, I would be running for my life. The sound of the front door opening startled me. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. None of the staff arrived this early, and we didn't open for another hour. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped cautiously toward the front. A man had entered. He stood just inside the doorway, the bell above the door still swaying from his arrival. He was tall, well-dressed, almost too well-dressed for a coffee shop at this hour. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his neatly combed hair looked like something out of a portrait from the 1800s. He had a faint smile on his face, but something about it didn't feel right. It was too fixed, too practiced, like he had rehearsed it in the mirror before walking in. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth and formal. "Could I trouble you for a coffee?" I hesitated. We weren't open yet, and something about him made my skin crawl. But refusing seemed unnecessary. He was polite, and making a coffee wasn't a big deal. Sure," I said. "We don't open for another hour, but I can make you something real quick." "Wonderful." He smiled wider, then walked over to a table near the window and sat down, folding his hands neatly on the table. I moved behind the counter, keeping one eye on him as I started his order. He didn't pull out his phone like most people would. He didn't glance around at the menu. Instead, he stared at the empty chair across from him, muttering. At first, I thought he was just talking to himself. Some people did that. But as I listened closer, I realized it wasn't just random muttering. He was having a full conversation with someone who wasn't there. I tried to ignore it. I finished his coffee, set it on the counter, and called out, "Here you go." He didn't respond. "Sir?" "Nothing." He was still staring at the empty chair, his lips moving rapidly, his fingers now clasped together, his shoulders tense. I grabbed the coffee and cautiously walked over to his table, setting it down in front of him. He finally looked up at me, his expression eerily calm. "Thank you," he said, then motioned to the chair across from him. "And my wife's?" I froze. I looked at the empty chair, then back at him. "Excuse me?" I asked carefully. "My wife's order," he said, a slight edge creeping into his voice. "You didn't bring her coffee." I felt my stomach drop. I glanced around the shop as if maybe I had somehow missed another person walking in. But we were alone. "Sir, there's no one else here," I said gently. The moment the words left my mouth, something changed in his eyes. His jaw clenched, his hands tightened into fists. "You're like them," he whispered. My breath caught. Before I could react, he slammed his palm against the table so hard that the cups rattled. "You think I'm crazy!" he shouted. I took a step back, my heart pounding. "Sir, I didn't say—" He shot to his feet so fast that his chair toppled over. His face twisted in fury. "Where is she?" he bellowed, kicking the table so hard it nearly flipped. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. Then he grabbed a chair and hurled it at me. The chair crashed into the counter, shattering one of the glass display cases. I barely had time to react before he grabbed another one and swung it wildly, knocking over tables and sending napkins and sugar packets flying. "You're like them!" he screamed. "You don't see her!" I bolted. I sprinted toward the back, but he was fast. Too fast. I heard the crash of breaking glass behind me as he smashed something else. Maybe a window, maybe another display case. My mind was in full panic mode. I yanked open the back door, but before I could escape, I heard the worst sound yet. A guttural, animalistic growl. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Blood was pouring down his arm. He had punched through the glass window with his bare hand, shards sticking out of his skin. But he didn't seem to care. He didn't even flinch. And then, he picked up a jagged piece of glass. My stomach twisted. He was coming for me. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. My legs moved on their own, instinct taking over. I bolted through the back door, shoving it open so hard it slammed against the wall. The alley behind the shop was narrow, lined with dumpsters and crates. But I didn't stop to think. I just ran. Behind me, I heard glass crunch under his shoes. Then footsteps. Fast. Heavy. I didn't look back. The early morning air was cold, burning in my lungs as I pushed myself forward. I knew this alley like the back of my hand. Knew that if I took a right at the end, I'd be on the main road. If I could make it there, I'd have a chance. Someone would see me. Maybe a passing car. Maybe a street cleaner. But his footsteps were getting closer. "You're like them," he muttered again, voice rising into a furious growl. "You pretend she isn't here. Just like them." I reached the end of the alley, turned the corner, and nearly crashed into a parked van. I barely caught myself, slamming a hand against the metal to keep from falling. The delay cost me. A hand clamped onto my shoulder. I screamed. His grip was iron, fingers digging into my shirt as he yanked me backward. My body twisted, and I caught my first clear look at his face. His eyes, wide, bloodshot, unblinking. And his smile, it was still there. That unnatural, stretched grin that hadn't faltered once since he'd walked in. But now, with blood dripping from his arm and pure rage contorting his features, it was terrifying. I did the only thing I could think of. I threw my elbow back, hard. I felt it connect with his ribs. He let out a strangled grunt, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench free. I didn't hesitate. I ran again, this time straight into the street. A car horn blared. Tires screeched. I barely managed to dodge as a small hatchback swerved to avoid me, coming to a screeching stop just inches away. The driver, a middle-aged man, threw open his door. "What the hell? Are you insane?" I didn't answer. I spun around, expecting to see my attacker charging after me. But he was gone. The alley was empty. I stood there panting, scanning every shadow, every doorway, every alley entrance. Nothing. No footsteps. No heavy breathing. No sign of him at all. The driver was still yelling, but his voice felt distant, muffled by the pounding in my ears. I barely registered him as I took a shaky step back toward the alley. Where did he go? I knew what I had seen. I felt him grab me. I heard him whispering behind me. But now, standing here in the cold morning light, it felt unreal. Had I imagined it? Number the shattered glass in the shop, the blood, my bruised shoulder. It all happened. I turned back to the driver. Call the police. The police arrived fast. Faster than I expected. Maybe it was the way I looked. Wide-eyed and shaking. That made the driver take me seriously. 2 officers questioned me while another went inside to inspect the damage. "You're saying he just disappeared?" one of them asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes." I swallowed, my throat dry. "I don't know how, but... Is there any back exit he could have taken?" I shook my head. "Just the one door. And the alley leads straight to the street. If he ran, someone would have seen him." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. I could tell they didn't know what to make of it. Inside the shop, the other officer called out, "Got something." We hurried back inside. Blood, a thick smear of it, stained the floor near the broken glass. There was no doubt it was his. But there was something else too. Something that made my stomach drop. On the counter, near where he had sat, 2 coffee cups, one full, the other empty, drained, as if someone had been drinking from it. The police never found him. There were no security cameras in the alley, and the shop's CCTV had been damaged during the rampage. No one else reported seeing a man matching his description. It was like he had never existed. But I knew the truth. I had seen him, felt his grip, heard his voice. And every morning when I unlocked the shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that he would come back. Because somewhere out there, he was still looking for her. And maybe, just maybe, she was looking for him too.